Well, let's get into the Heritage Foundation and just kind of leave a blank slate. But I mean, you knew there was an issue. That, yeah, tell us about even before you started it. What are some of the issues related to? Like the state has, there's no way for someone to give money specifically to a project because it goes into a general fund or. And so you had this issue that you were trying to overcome, I believe. Is that not the case?
That was part of it. There are a number of restrictions relative to how you can spend public monies. And relative to donations to the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, any direct donation, with the exception of the land stamp, which we put in place in 1990 for acquisition of open space, went into the general fund, and it had to. It wasn't dedicated necessarily to fish and wildlife conservation. And there are a number of other things that in the course of pursuing some of our conservation initiatives, we were restricted in the way that we could do our business. For example, if we were to put on a promotional event where we'd like to have some refreshments, apple cider, coffee, or donuts, for things like our Sport Fishers Awards program, we'd have to have a third party provide the funds for it because we couldn't use directly the public funds. And it wasn't unique to Massachusetts, by the way. Most states in the country had similar restrictions on how you can use public monies. And in the 1990s, some states started to develop legislation one way or the other that allowed them to set up a nonprofit support organization to enable them to take donations and other monies to work directly in some of their conservation initiatives. And we were looking at that, and George and I were talking about what we could do to facilitate the delivery of services by the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, and more particularly to promote some of our conservation initiatives. And so I started writing one with, looked into it, and Steve gave us the incorporation papers and what they had done for the foundation in Kansas. And I looked into some others that some other states had got. And essentially, Jack Buckley, who was deputy director then, and I wrote the thing, and I'd say there's no question we plagiarized a good bit of the framework out of what they had done in Kansas. And then had it drafted and written. But we were having a very difficult time figuring how to get it really started, because just about every foundation that had been done by other states had a grassroots sponsor. And we're trying to find somebody that would put up sponsorship funding for it. And this went on for some time, and we weren't very successful. And George kept after me to get it incorporated. So he finally wore me down. So I went down to the Secretary of State and incorporated a foundation at the state level, which was not difficult to do. You file your incorporation papers and pay whatever it was, a $35 fee, I think, and got it incorporated. And then from there, started working on getting a 501c3 authorization from the federal government. And started working on that with some help from some people, we had formed a group of people. It was the nucleus of the board then, including a friend of Gigi's who was counsel for the town of Lenox, Sally Bell. And I talked with Sally, and she would, she gave me some guidance and help on how to go about writing the filing for the 501c3. And that took about another 6 months, but eventually we got the 501c3. And then we were set up in a business without any operating money. And Judge put several thousands of dollars into that to get us going.
And then, so now you've got a board,
And
you
we-
have a 501c3, but you don't know how to run something like, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but how do you run something like that?
Well, remember we went down to see Eleanor Tillinghast?
We were struggling to well, there are two other parts to this. We had to get some waivers to make it operate legally within the state framework. And because a number of the people on the board, the director of the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife and the chairman of the board are ex officio members of the foundation, and some other state officials that had a conservation interest, we get a waiver that allowed us to operate without getting in conflict with other state laws through then Governor Salucci, who and Lieutenant Governor James Swift, and did some necessary paperwork through the governor's powers and offices that allowed state officials some state officials to be part of that board.
In what year was it actually incorporated?
Well, 2001 is when everything was up and running. Most of that legwork that went on around that went on in 1998, 1999, in 2000, in that time frame. And by 2001, we were up and running. So.
Yeah, and we went down to see Eleanor Tillinghast one day, or I went to see her and talked to her about foundations and things. And I was very impressed. And I had Wayne and Jack come up again, and we met her. And she said, I have a person that does research work for me, Sue Benoit, and she's very, very smart. And she could help you with this, get her on a part-time basis. She does research work for me, and she's very, very good. So we got her on a very, very limited basis where we didn't have much money, but we finally kept it going. But we all of a sudden found out that Sue Benoit, who is now Sue Sacco, was very, very smart. And one day Wayne said to me, he said, we have got to find a place for her. So we've created a job that we needed anyway for her, and she did a super job there. And so we moved her up, and now she's assistant to the director, way up on the totem pole. That's how fast that we moved her up, and has done a tremendous job for us. And as you know, in the foundation, how much she's helped us. And so this is the way that got started.
What do you see as some of the opportunities? Now the foundation has gone from being pretty small and grassroots. There's still very low overhead. I don't have a number, but I have to imagine it's less than 5% of the money is used for overhead. and there's over $100,000 in the bank, and we've starting to get corporate sponsors. You know, how do you, if you had a vision of how you'd like to see this grow over the next 5 to 10 years, I mean, you're leaving this legacy. What do you, what do you see happening?
I think, Wayne, what we need is one big major sponsor. All the other ones are do a very good job for us, but we really need some big group to come in there and carry the ball for us. But we've come a long ways, you know. So, and the stuff we've done, and
Well, I think there's a niche that we fill or are trying to fill that addresses a need, because we don't wish to duplicate the efforts of a number of conservation entities. But clearly there was a need and is still a need there relative to working very closely with the State Division of Fishes and Wildlife governmental programs and providing the necessary support to address things that the state isn't able to do. And those, I think, are fluid and will constantly change over time as society's needs and pressures and cultural changes occur relative to overall efforts that are associated with conservation.
Can you tell us about some of the first projects that you did? That, you know, give us an example of. I know you did Stafford Hill was one. I think I know the trout in I can't remember the name of the town, but in north central Mass there. You know, kind of explain how the money from the foundation was able to be used for. Then we can go into maybe some land acquisition. You know, examples of how this works and why it's different, and people can, you know, make good use of their money. I guess that would be.
Well, we undertook a number of small projects that were driven primarily by donations that came in where people were aware of what we were doing because we were out talking to people about it, and they had an interest in funding some specific types of projects. Some habitat management projects, which is what, and biodiversity projects, which was what we did up at Stafford Hill. We had a bequest for brook trout habitat management, and we used that bequest to undertake a restoration of a native brook trout stream called Gulf Brook in Townsend, Massachusetts, and worked with the town and the Conservation Commission there to open up passage in the stream through a road that went over the stream that the town was in the process of rebuilding. And in partnership with Trout Unlimited Boston and the Statistic chapter of Trout Unlimited, the town of Townsend and the Nashua River, I can't remember exactly the name, but Nashua River Conservation. I just can't remember that. Anyways, the Nashua River Coalition raised enough money to do a project that, when all was said and done, we'd leveraged about $100,000 to restore passage into this native brook trout stream. And then we also got involved with some acquisition projects, particularly one up in northeastern Massachusetts, where the value the appraised value for the project was more than the state could purchase under state requirements, and raise the difference with the foundation to add to state wildlife lands up in Topsfield and Essex, Ipswich, Massachusetts. And so that's exactly why we set the foundation up, was to facilitate and pursue our conservation initiatives where there were restrictions on how we could operate with respect to the Division of Fishes and Wildlife itself. And we also helped facilitate a donation of some $175,000 that ended up in purchasing of over 100 acres of wildlife management land in western Massachusetts. Also got involved with educational efforts. A number of them, particularly the Archery in the Schools program. We did some printing for a document called Living Waters, which provides a framework and a blueprint for the conservation of biodiversity in our aquatic systems, and undertook a number of efforts like that. Undertook some direct management efforts, particularly with respect to securing materials and items associated with wood duck restoration and development of wood duck nesting boxes and associated structures. So we've had a real variety of initiatives going on. Also, we've been able to support some of our events that are promoting fish and wildlife conservation, such as I mentioned earlier, the Sport Fish Awards program. The red-bellied cooter, it was a species that is listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it occurs in southeastern Massachusetts in some of the freshwater ponds that are located particularly in Plymouth. And the division had been involved with the program for a number of years that involved finding the eggs of the turtles after they were laid and artificially incubating them and raising them through the winter so that they didn't go into hibernation, and the turtles continued to grow all winter. And we got involved with the program that in part had some additional sponsorship from one of our corporate partners, Genzyme, and got involved with working with some of the local schools where some of the turtles were taken and raised in the school setting. And then when we did the releases, having the students come and participate in the release, and having a whole field day focus on everything associated with the program is very popular with the teachers, and the students all seem to be enthusiastic about it and loved it. And the foundation was able to provide some of the money in terms of supporting that initiative.
We've done a lot of projects with the Berkshire Natural Resource Council. We do them with individuals in other parts of the state. But the Resource Council, I think that we've had 39 projects where we work together as partners on these projects. And right now, I know there's a couple that are going to be completed and where we're going to be, again, we're partners with the Resource Council. But we have something different here. We have the Berkshire Natural Resource Council with, first with George Wislocky and then with Tad Ames, and we have the partnerships here that they've been very, very beneficial to us.
George, the person that donated the land in Peru was Madeline Fleur,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and she had worked here for a number of years at the Audubon Pleasant Valley Sanctuary, and she in fact was a member of our board at one time.
They've been
Genzyme.
with
Yeah.
We've had corporate donations from National Grid.
Done projects with rough grouse as well too, wasn't
We
the-
partnership with both the Rough Grouse Society and a habitat management project out here on the what's
Moran.
the Moran Wildlife Area. But I would suspect we've probably got upwards of 100 schools involved now. We got seed money from the National Archery in the Schools program, also as past president, and being there, become knowledgeable and aware of various programs going on across the country with the board support of the Fisheries and Wildlife Board, authorized us to begin to initiate a program in Massachusetts. And there was some seed money that came from the national program to get us started, and then it was effort after that, and part of this raising monies locally, which the Outdoor Heritage Foundation has become a focal part of that effort to keep it going.
We got a lot of things, a lot of things done by certain individuals that got involved in this, and this is the way we picked up land. Like well, for example, we had over in West Stockbridge, we had the Flatbrook Wildlife Management Area that we started, and we have to buy land with the price it's appraised by. And some land that we wanted was appraised for, the owners of the land wanted more than it was appraised for. And the Berkshire Natural Resource Council jumped in on 3 parcels and kicked in a lot of thousands of dollars so that we can get this. And this, if you're going out of West Stockbridge towards New York State border, we have the Flatbrook Wildlife Management Area that starts right on the Williams River, and then right across the turnpike we have Maple Hill, and that goes all the way to another river there where we own property. And because of them kicking money in, we're able to get these properties. And in fact, right on Maple Hill now, the division has started a big habitat restoration place, because that used to be an excellent place for rabbit hunting, for bird hunting, and then it just grew up in that intermediate area where it's not good for very much. And the division has started to work on that. We've put a parking lot up there, and that's some of the things that we've gotten into.
We had appropriated money for the Roseate tern project in down Buzzards Bay.
And Martha's Vineyard, in partnership with the Island Foundation. The Roseate tern is the most endangered of the bird species on the eastern coast, and we support over half the population on 2 islands in Buzzards Bay, Ram Island and Bird Island. and that money goes towards management efforts to sustain and hopefully increase the nesting success of those roseate terns.
And one of the things we got into too was
For example, right now there's a tremendous focus on the conservation management side on trying to create young forests and old field type habitats, because there's been such a decline in that type of habitat throughout the northeastern United States. And in the future, if those efforts are successful, at some point there'll be a need to focus more on other types of habitat, because it's a dynamic natural landscape and there's constant change. Nature does not like stability. It actually requires disturbance to maintain diversity of species. That's sort of a hard concept for people to think about, because for so long all we've heard is nothing but protection and preservation. But there's a management component to it that once you've protected an area, you still need to management if you want to sustain the diversity of wildlife species that inhabit it.
To get back to this again, Stafford Hill is the perfect example of it. I had a field trip. I brought a whole bunch of people, not just sportsmen, but environmentalists and people who were big into preserving different species. And I had the local head of Mass Audubon with me. We went up to Stafford Hill. And on one side of the road, they cut it one way. And this is when the birds were really singing during the mating season. And we went up on this side, and he identified a whole bunch of birds on one side of the road. We went about 2/10 of a mile on the other side of the road, where it had been cut in a different way, and he identified a whole bunch of different songbirds. And before he left there that day, he identified 58 different species of birds. Can you imagine that? In that one place where they just cut it in different ways.
And how did the foundation actually help that happen? Versus did they give money to actually up the type of trimming of trees, or what?
Yeah, that's exactly. You provided funding that enabled the ongoing management efforts to cover more acreage than they otherwise would be able to do.
But for me, as I told you, it's been a ride that I would not change for anything. As I said, $1 million, because the people I work with, the things I could get done, the fun I had, and the support I had from everybody. It was a ride that could never be duplicated. This is just the way I feel about it. It's, I'm very happy and very comfortable to know that we've got you as my replacement. I know you're going to do a good job.
Well, thanks. I have one an additional thing that I'd like to get your thoughts on. Fish and wildlife, like you said, kind of started as and you have a term that's hooks and guns, but I think I see I see in my generation and my kids' generation the future becoming people that do organic farming or into local foods and stuff like that, or into conservation of habitat. So I see it not being so, I think that the hunters and the fisher and the trappers are important, but I see it much broader going forward, is that people realize these are not adversarial, these are kind of one and the same, and broadening the support going forward. Can you talk about that just a little bit, or do you see that happening?
I tell you the truth, I'm very worried about it. 'Cause I think we're fighting rearguard action to see to keep what we've got. Today, you see young kids, I lived just down the road from where we are now. Just about every kid in our neighborhood, the Christian Hill neighborhood there, hunted and fished and camped out and things like this. And today, you don't see this in kids. Yeah, we've got a few programs, youth pheasant hunt, the youth turkey hunt, the youth deer hunt, but the kids are just not into this anymore, and we're losing our constituency very quickly, and it's something that I think that Massachusetts, because of different people that are today working with different county leagues and things like this, I think we can keep it going for a while. But I think that down the road in a few years, you're going to see a change. Because I was at a county league meeting one night, and I said the same thing, and they didn't believe me. I said, how many people here are under 50 years old? One guy put his hand up. He said, how many of you guys are between 60 and 70? A whole bunch of them did. I said, this is just, we're fighting rearguard action to keep what we've got. Can we do it better in Massachusetts than anybody else? Yes, we can. We can do it because of a lot of reasons. Because we have natural heritage and endangered species. We have a very good Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, and we'll probably survive a lot better than most states will. But we're fighting rearguard action to have what we to have what we've got today. And as I said, it's been a huge ride for me. I just would not replace this for anything, and then feeling very comfortable with you replacing me.
Yeah, the future is always difficult to predict. Our culture is changing, and it changes as society changes. I think an analogy would be, when I started my career and would be out speaking, I would ask people if if there was anybody in the room that was a farmer, and there might be one or two. As time went on, I'd ask if did they know a farmer? They have a relative that farmed. And at the end of my career, there were no farmers. There were no people that knew farmers. There were no people, literally, that in any way associated with farmers. And that's because there was such a huge change in our society, and the farming community here in Massachusetts became a smaller and smaller and smaller part of the society. And the impact of that, I think, reflects itself in societal views, and more to the point, the politics around it in the future. And what George was talking about is real. Our youth, our younger generations, don't have much association with the outdoors, and they don't develop, or we're concerned that they're not developing that interest and passion and support for sustaining conservation is part of important part of our society. Today it is. There's no question there. You survey the public as a whole, and there's strong support there. I'm not sure that will continue in the future, but clearly the model that's driven on the basis of fee-driven monies that support all conservation is at real risk. We don't, not just here, across the country, really wrestling with what the funding model of the future may be relative to fish and wildlife conservation efforts, because in the abstract, people are very supportive. But in the reality is, when you ask them what's important to them, it's their health, it's their education, it's their public safety, it's their roads. And maybe at the end of that, if there's enough funding for all of that, there may be a small amount of money that they would put into conservation. And I think here in Massachusetts, a very strong measure of that would be the Community Preservation Act, which not all communities in Massachusetts embraced, in terms of accepting a small tax that provided additional monies for maintaining conservation, open space, and historical preservation here in Massachusetts. And we're at the forefront of society confronting that. And I'm not sure, I can't see, I don't know how that will play out in the future. Just don't know. But I fear that we may very well lose that strong support that is visceral support that's here today in our society.